Hello and welcome to today's tutorial. Today we will be covering a question that I get quite often, and that is, how the heck do you read a peyote word chart? I'll be using the same perler beads and large threaded needle as always to work on this project. Feel free to follow along if you'd like. Let's get started. Here is the simple pattern that we're going to be using today. As you can see, each row is a different color. It's simple, but it's perfect for today's demonstration. So let's first look at the anatomy of a word chart before we dive too far in. First, I want to talk about the fact that there are two different types of word charts that you might come across. One is like the one you see here, where rows 1 and 2 are combined into one row. The other type of word chart you might come across will have rows 1 and 2 separate, in which case you would use a starter strip to start that kind of pattern. We will cover starter strips in another video, and today we're just going to focus on this type of word chart with the first two rows combined. The next thing we want to look at is the numbers and letters in this pattern. In my patterns, the number of beads are represented by numbers in parentheses, and the color is represented by a capital letter. So how do we know what these letters correspond to? For that, we have to take a look at our color chart. Each designer may have a color chart that looks a tad different, but they will have all the info you need to do your pattern. As you can see in my color chart, the capital letter J represents the color yellow as seen here. Some pattern designers will use letters, some will use numbers, and some will use symbols. It can all be deciphered here in the color chart. Some patterns may also include more information like color name, manufacturer number, count, and other information. So let's look at this first one. In this example, the letter A represents the color pink. In the word chart, every time you see a letter A, you would add a pink bead. In this example, there are also the total number of beads in the pattern. This is a small example, so there are only 3 beads total for each color. This will obviously change with each pattern. Okay, let's go back to our word chart and see what we have. This is our first row. We're going to be adding both rows 1 and row 2 beads. So how would we add this? First, we will be adding 1 blue because remember, the number in the parentheses represents how many of that color we will be adding. We will then add 1 white, 1 blue, 1 white, 1 blue, and 1 white. Here is what it will look like when you have added it to your string. Here we have row 1, white beads, and row 2, the blue beads. Now let's go back to our word chart. We have our combined rows 1 and 2 added. So let's go ahead and cross that line off so we don't get confused at where we are in the pattern. If you would like to see what I use to keep track of my place while beading, there's a link under this video that will take you to that article and talk about that. Okay, combined row is crossed off. Now let's look at our next row, row 3. The next row is made up of 3 yellow beads. So we are going to be adding 3 beads to the next row. Let's take a look at how this is going to look with our beads. Let's pick up 1 yellow bead and add it on top of the white bead of row 1. Now, okay, pull it tight. Now we're going to pick up our second yellow bead and add it just like we did the last bead. So through our blue bead here, and then we're going to pick up our third yellow bead, thus completing the row 3 of our pattern, which is yellow in this example. We've completed row 3 and crossed it off on our pattern, so now we're ready for row 4. Just like row 3, we will be adding 3 beads. This time, they will be green, which is represented by a capital F in this word chart. So let's look at how this will look in our beads again. I'm going to pick up 1 green bead and pass my needle through the yellow up bead or row 3, just like we did with the last row when we added the yellows. Now let's pick up a second green bead and add it like the last, and finally our third green bead. There we go. Now we have 4 rows of peyote finished. Going back to our pattern, you'll see that I crossed off the 4th row now that it's finished. The next step would be to complete row 5 and then 6 and 7 and so on until you've reached the end of your pattern. Here's what the finished beadwork will look like. In this pattern, each row consisted of 3 beads of the same color. Way back when I decided to try my first word chart, the 2 things I had the most trouble with was starting because of that really confusing combined first 2 rows, and that the pattern says 3 beads and I don't pick up all 3 at once and add them. I have to pick them up individually and add them between the previous row. The best thing is for you to just keep practicing. The more you try, the better you'll get at it. So that was today's tutorial, how to read a peyote word chart. I want to give you a big thanks for checking out this tutorial, and until next time, happy beading!